Welcome to the Energizing India podcast, a program that focuses on electric mobility in India, giving a voice to the industry sector. My name is Ravin Mirchandani, and on this program we feature conversations with key protagonists, industry leaders and opinion makers, creating a narrative on how to facilitate faster adoption of electric mobility in India. Our program has now been running for 12 months, and we have covered a host of subjects including battery chemistries, the potential for gigafactories in India, charging standards, government policies, mobility technologies, and the challenges for charge point operators. Today, we have a great conversation coming up for you, examining the electric mobility industry in India from a completely different perspective. This is going to be a fun episode, as today we talk to Alisha Sachdev, a journalist and TV anchor with CNBC TV18. Alisha was a former news anchor with NDTV, and also writes for the business pages of Hindustan Times. She's one of India's preeminent media experts covering the auto sector, given that she has interviewed almost every business and every CEO in this sector. Alisha, welcome to the program, and thank you for coming all the way from Delhi to our studio in Pune.
Thank you so much, Ravin, and that's a sparkling introduction that you've given to me. So I'll try and hope at least to live up to some of that praise that you very generously showered on me today.
So, Alisha, you have a very interesting background. You started as a very young journalist in university, fronting a program called Youth Ki Awaaz, where you covered subjects like the irresponsible stereotyping of the LGBT community in mainstream media. You then became a very recognizable face anchoring NDTV News, where you covered some very contentious subjects as well, such as the independence of the pillars and institutions of India, in particular the departure of Raghunath Rajan, for example, from the RBI. And you've written editorials and op-eds on interesting but unrelated subjects, such as bonding over the love of books. You could well be described as the ideal of what a senior journalist should be, well-rounded and balanced in your perspective, and in many different ways with many different passions and talents. So how did this come about? What was the journey that led Alisha to this point in your career?
Right. And again, very generous in the comments that you make. But I've been I've been a business journalist working in broadcast now for almost 4 years. So the journey, of course, it's hard for me to sort of, map it out even mentally when I think about it. It just came by like that. I was very certain by the time I was I was graduating from journalism school that I want to be a business journalist. So the definition for me of business news was very vast. And I think the most definitive stint then of my career is, with CNBC TV18 now where I work. And I've been tracking the auto sector, for the last 2.5 years. So it's a very holistic, sort of industry, and you get to see impact, unfolding in front of you. It's in the vehicles that people are using, it's in the infrastructure around you. Everything, especially around auto is just very, very tangible in so many ways. So, it's very exciting to cover that. And with EVs now, there's a, very definitive policy push. Manufacturers are also beginning to put their money where their mouth is as well. So I think the next few years are going to be very interesting, to watch. And it's a great time then to be tracking this sector and be a journalist who gets to see this from the front line, so to say.
So you're obviously a good journalist, because my second question was going to be why auto, and you answered that, preempting that I was going to ask you that. So I'll ask you a different question. Given that you've been in the auto-focused media industry, 2 years ago, when we used to talk to people about electric vehicles, we were laughed out of the room. It was something over the horizon. And then, of course, Minister Gadkari came out and said the target of 2030, which became a hope and, and perhaps an objective for 2025 for two-wheelers. 2 years ago, did you see this as a journalist coming? This wave, mega wave that we've embarked upon in 2021?
I think 2 years ago is just about the time that we started to see this conversation get very real. And again, all of this is my view, right? Not necessarily, what a CNBC would represent. But right at the start of me covering this sector, as an auto journalist, The sort of scenario that I jumped into was, we were navigating a transition to BS6, and parallelly there was a conversation happening, when a government affiliated think tank was talking about, 100% sort of an electrification target in the next decade or so. And that, of course, invited a lot of pushback from the industry because, we have a huge automotive sector, in India. We're only the fifth largest market in the world, I believe. It's a huge job creator also. And, this is technology that evolves over a period of time. This is a market that evolves over a period of time. So at that point, it did seem inconceivable. And also, there wasn't any product on the roads at all. We did have one car, a 2.5 million rupees car, which was conveniently, I mean, it's easily unaffordable, for the vast majority of our automotive buyers. So of course it was hard to take it very seriously back then, but since that point onwards things have actually evolved pretty fast. So we've seen a revamped government policy, a central government policy, which is the FAME 2 scheme. So the incentives have become a lot more attractive. Manufacturers are also doing this in a lot, in a much more serious way. There's still not nearly as many products, for us to say that there's a, comprehensive choice of products to choose from, but you at least have a product in, let's say each category. So it's become a lot more visible, and also, combined with the fact that, we had of course, COVID came and, it's informed our lives in many, many ways. But I think what it also did was that in some ways we did become a little more receptive towards, having a conversation about EVs. I wouldn't give it enough credit and say, that was the inflection point at all. But then there were other things also which coincided. The fuel prices started to go up, even as we speak, the rise is fairly consistent, and it's prohibitively expensive also for many, many people. So, I think manufacturers have also been able to successfully demonstrate that there is a very favorable TCO, a total cost of ownership, argument in favor of the customer. So, if they're willing to, cough up, 25-30% premium over what they would want to pay for, a comparative ICE-powered vehicle, then they actually stand to save a lot in the longer run. And there's of course a cool factor. You will have early adopters in every market, and that's starting to really show. I'm sure you've seen, some of the EVs. We won't name names, but we know which ones those are. They're on the roads already. People are using them, and it doesn't feel like an abstract thing anymore at all. And for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, the volumes are, those many more. So it's a very real proposition, and state government policies are incentivizing them, beginning with two-wheelers and three-wheelers. That's also what I think we've sort of got right, in the last 2 years. I think the focus has finally started to shift towards these sort of low-hanging fruits more than just, electric four-wheelers, which we know, even in the government-to-government space hasn't sort of really worked as well as, one thought it would. Yes, you're right. One would have probably laughed at the prospect of, these numbers that, one spoke of 2 years ago. But it does feel like, we're on our way, not to those numbers still, but it's happening steadily but surely, and I don't think there's any going back from this point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A year ago, I'd count a green number plate one a week. Right. And that became, one every 2 or 3 days. Now you see 3 or 4 a day, and it's starting to be exponential. You've touched on a few very interesting subjects. You talked about TCO, and you touched on the 2030 target. With the podcast research team, we ran an interesting exercise. We said, well, let's go to the MORTH site and look at how many vehicles are registered in India, and it was something just over 330 million. And when you break that down, 82% was two-wheelers, and about 12% was commercial vehicles. And of those 12%, the majority was trucks, not buses. And the balance was cars, and then, of course, three-wheelers. So to achieve that 2030 target, actually, two-wheelers need to move first, as you call the low-hanging fruit. Yeah. And when you look at the sheer number, 82% of 330 million vehicles, and then you look at the market. Yeah. So now when you look at the per year, right? Per year, 20 million a year to get that over 10 years. So 270 million eventually, right? To convert the whole fleet today. If you look at the capacities, right? Hero's got 55,000 a year in electric scooters, wanting to go to 75. They will. They're the only company that does achieve what they're saying they're going to. But there's a myriad of others who say 2 million, others say 10 million. Even if all of them came on stream, you wouldn't have enough capacity in today's picture, unless there's significant other investments to come, to achieve that target. Yeah. What is your view on this, the ability for industry to move with this 2030? I wouldn't even call it a target, it's an objective. Many countries have a target. Sri Lanka has a hard target, Germany has a hard target, Australia has a hard target. But we have a hope, not yet a target in India. So what do you think will happen by 2030?
I would like to believe that a lot can be achieved, in the decade that we have between now and 2030. But you're absolutely right to point out that the capacities are not nearly enough. If you look at the number of, or the size of the government tenders, that, a CESL, for instance, has floated, we're talking about 200,000 or 300,000 two-wheelers and three-wheelers predominantly. But those kind of capacities don't exist, at the moment. So even when there is demand, the ability to ramp up is a serious concern. And of course, there are external supply chain issues as well, which will take their own time to resolve. And I believe when there is enough demand, it's easier to solve them, versus the scenario when there is no demand, then of course there's no incentive to also ramp up. So that I think will happen. But then, there's also the other issues around, charging infrastructure. So while we can have a volume target in mind or a hope in mind, it takes more than just the product to make it viable, right? So I'm sure. Yeah. So, the ecosystem is also an investment that, the government and manufacturers have to come together to make. And, it's a conversation we keep having, repeatedly, what would come first? Do we, make the ecosystem robust and conducive, to give customers faith to actually buy into an EV? Again, in India, we have the challenges of not having a dedicated parking spot for many two-wheeler owners. So, you need to have swappable batteries, but then they're too heavy. How do you carry them to your homes? So these are also, issues to address alongside, just generating capacity. I was reading this report, which said that in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen more investments being put into EVs than, any other period in time in India before.
The last 10 years in 1 year.
Right. So when there are these kind of investments, they're naturally going into capacity building as well. But it's a question of how fast, how soon. And when you do have these capacities, is there going to be enough offtake also? Because so far there weren't these kind of capacities because the offtake was also extremely limited. It's only very recently, that... like we just discussed, that the TCO conversation is something that customers are starting to understand. You have more visibility in terms of the product on the road, and everyone's really, really hurt by fuel prices. So right now is a great time, to actually ramp up capacities, because there is a very natural and steady moment that electric two-wheelers are having right now. So, it's anyone's guess what happens in the next 10 years, but it has to start right now. I have cause to believe that it is starting right now, but, the pace of things and then, the adoption that comes along with it is something that we'll need to keep watching.
So our own considered opinion on Energizing India is that the people buying their vehicles this year,
right,
whether you're buying a scooter, rickshaw, car, bus, well, leave aside bus, but truck, for example, this is likely for a majority of them the last cycle of ICE acquisitions. In 3 years,
I believe so.
You will be at the position of going, I can actually have an equivalent TCO to move to an electric. And so your decision won't be about cost. It'll be about what is my use case, and can I justify for my use case, and therefore the best product, and do I have charging capabilities and things like that. And by then, of course, not only will you have different chemistries, you might not have lithium ion, you could have sodium ion. So sodium ion has a smaller energy density. And so if you're going slow and long trucks, rickshaws, in that case, sodium ion would work, and it's significantly cheaper, for example. We could have hydrogen as a use case as well in 4 or 5 years. So
Right,
I think many
right.
things are going to change. You're absolutely right. You talked about something very pertinent, and that's policies and regulations. And I think that's calling a spade, where China trumps over India, isn't it? Because we have this federalist structure, and China has this very centralized structure, and one man can make the decisions, and it's rolled out. And here we have a myriad. You have of course the ministry that has guidelines, and then someone else comes up with policy. States have their own framework, and then you have the municipality. We thought we would put one of our chargers outside our head office in Mumbai, and it was a rather naive concept because we hadn't realized that you need so many permissions. To
How
put it
many
on the street.
permissions?
Well, the reality is you need permission not only from the electricity department, but you also need a retail license, and you need permission from
Oh, you do?
Yes, then you need permission from the BMC because you're using curbside space. But you need permission from the BMC as well because you're going to use parking spots. So you need
Right.
you need to then pay for those parking spots, and then you're going to be making money from that curbside space. So then there's another permission for making money on a curbside space,
Right.
which is not a permanent permission. And so now you don't have guarantee of tenure in a particular location. And the reality of this isn't that they're making it difficult. The reality is nobody's thought through
Thought
this
this through,
because
yeah.
we have rules that are made at any given time, and then they become the reality for the next 80 or 100 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in this context, it's a bit unfortunate because it slows us down, and that's the experience in Indian business over and over again. It's the myriad of regulations and policies that'll slow us down. And then if you're a Mumbai operator want to go to Delhi, you've got to learn it all over again because Delhi has its own rules, which are different from Mumbai's rules.
Sure. Yeah.
In your opinion, how do we address this as a country? Is there an opportunity to address this?
I'm glad that you brought this up yourself. I, for example, didn't know that, it takes, this sort of number of permissions and, this kind of, process that you have to go through. Not every state, again, has, put out similar incentives. So depending on where you are situated and then depending on where you're buying a vehicle from, does it still make sense for you? Again, I'm speaking from a more user point of view. How do I go and claim my subsidies even? Because, as somebody who's going to buy into an electric vehicle, that's the only concern I have. How much am I paying for this? Because, this is the market that we have. It's the nature of the market. Is it 5,000 rupees lesser as compared to a Splendor that I would have bought, for example? And so you need to be able to see that very, very clearly. And I believe a lot of those processes are now getting a little more streamlined. The dispersal of incentives, for example, it's getting a little easier, faster. So that gives you confidence that, hey, maybe in a month's time, I'm going to be surprised with a cash back in my bank account. But from a manufacturer's point of view, we do have the Tata Group, for instance, who's really leveraging the combined strength of, all the different entities that they have. And putting out these solutions. But I do think that there is room to also make this a more painless process for players who don't want to do it at scale, but want to figure out this market and see what works. So that should be a lot easier. And, I think that can definitely do with, more incentivization, not just financial terms, but in terms of, like technological or policy aid, who do you go to when you run into a solution, problem like that? Like which agency do you run to? So maybe there should be something a little more, structured that lets you address these problems. But I think the answer would have been in a nationwide EV policy. But again, it's India. It's very, very hard to formulate something and implement it across the various mini countries that we have.
That's
within
well put,
India.
various mini countries. So I'm going to stay on that subject and probe you a little bit more. And that subject is China. The reality is we want to be Atmanirbhar. We want this investment to come. It's come, as we've seen. The investment over the last 10 years is what we've had in 2021 in EVs. But every investment you make here is actually facilitating China today because nothing is made in India, right?
Yeah.
So all the cells, lithium cells, are coming from China. Up until 2024, at least, when the first gigafactories will come to India, 3 are set to be started in Gujarat, where
Yeah.
we'll start making lithium cells, and then those cells will be packed by many different people. But till then, everything is imported from China. There is no electric motor infrastructure in India, component infrastructure in India. So everything is in fact coming from China. So we are facilitating China while we're trying to be independent of them.
Yeah.
How do we change this?
That's an excellent point, really. And I think you might have some perspective to share as well, because you do, work with a lot of export markets. And I mean, yeah, it's an interesting way to put it, because the investment, like you said, is ultimately going back to China. And, in one of the initial conversations we had, you were talking about how we're, on the one hand, talking about reducing, our dependence on oil imports, but then we're creating this another kind of dependence, so one at the cost of the other. So how do we change that? Again, it has to be worked out into a more holistic solution. You have to, of course, localize, but again, are there enough volumes? Do we have the technological expertise? We're in a rush to just put product out. We want to do it in the shortest frame of time. We want to do it at the lowest possible cost. We're all still learning. Manufacturers at least the legacy manufacturers are in this sort of a wait and watch phase right now. The upstarts, there's like a flurry of activity there. So one wonders, who's going to capture this market ultimately, because, it's possible that this demand may be created, from the Chinese imports that we are getting into the country. And perhaps eventually what will happen is, once there is, this kind of organic demand, that's maybe when the legacy players will come in and capture that market and then own it. Maybe that's one scenario that can unfold. But to your mind, what's the sort of mindset shift also that needs to happen? Because that's what we were talking about. There's a certain way and there's a certain set of things, that a manufacturer here would prioritize vis-a-vis, how the ecosystems developed in other parts of the world.
Good question. Thank you for asking it back. I'll answer it in three parts, Alicia, because it's an interesting subject. And the first one is, in fact, one of the guests on our show a couple of months back, who was the CEO of Radian Batteries, sodium-ion, James Quinn, he said something brilliantly. He said, when the United States decided they want to go to the moon, it was in 1962 that President Kennedy came out and said, we'll do it. Within this decade, we'll do it. And they did not have any idea how they'll do it, but everyone got behind that mission, that vision, that objective, that we must do it. Today, you think they were mad because they went up in a tin can with less computing capability than your phone, and everything was done in Houston, and they came back alive, thank God, for the most. What we need here is that kind of mission that's set right from the top, whether it's the Prime Minister, and Minister Gadkari did try, but where the nation gets behind it for a nationalistic reason that says, we are going to do this. We are going to be the best in the world in a particular segment of the automotive industry, whether it's two-wheelers or rickshaws or cars or buses. And that's where the world will come to for electric vehicles in that segment. And then, therefore, what do we need to do? And therefore, my investment will be channeled in that direction. And it's not just to deleverage from China. It's to say, I will be the best way. Even China will be forced to buy from me because I will be better than they are in that industry. That kind of aggressive, bold, ballsy vision, right? The second element that I think needs to be addressed on this is our perspective as a nation. And that comes right down to education policy through the government policy. And that is, as you said, when you're buying something, if it's 5,000 rupees cheaper, I will go and buy that because my subsistence is impacted by that 5,000 rupees. However, that 5,000 rupees is false economy quite often, because in the end, your total cost of ownership might be impacted, or the life of your equipment might be impacted. And I think we need a mindset change that says, following on from that vision and objective to be the best, to reward Indian. We do not reward Indian. We do not say, I will give extra points, in whether it's private or public industry, for Indian.
That's very interesting because, whenever we hear, the government's view on this, it seems very decidedly in favor of manufacturing in India. There's so much conversation around Tesla lobbying the government, for an import duty cut, for instance. And the government has, gone on record and said that they're more than welcome to manufacture, to sell in India. But why wouldn't you also manufacture in India? It's a whole different story that the market's perhaps not ripe for Tesla to do this in India yet. But, that seems to be where they come from. But you're practicing this. You're on the ground, you're, developing, selling this technology. So where do you think how does this translate into reality, what we hear?
Yeah, it's a good point. The answer to Tesla is an obvious one, because if whoever came here tomorrow, right? If Mack Trucks came and said, I want to just import trucks, or Scania said they want to come back here, but they just want to import trucks, you would get that answer from government, which is, I'm about protecting my automotive industry and fomenting my automotive industry, so you must come here. That answer would have been no different 10 years ago from a different government, because that is the policy, stated policy of repeated governments across party lines in India. So I'm not surprised by that answer. In fact, I'm surprised Tesla asked differently because the answer was quite obvious, the answer that they got. But when you look at government policy, now Minister Gadkari has said he wants a charger every 40 kilometers right across the national highway network. Fantastic. Everyone's excited about it. But it will eventually be a tender. It'll be L1. And when you have L1, it's going to be Chinese because they build in an hour what most Indian factories will be building in a sort of 6 months or a year. The economies of scale available in China are not available here. The cost of land available there is not available here. The ease of business doing, rules, regulations, policies, taxation, subsidies, that's available there. It's just not available here. So everything is stacked up against us when you're going to have a policy of L1. I would say that the policy needs to change. What does Germany do? Germany says, I will give you extra points in a tender if you're German. What do most European countries do? They say, I'm going to mark you 60% on your technical competence and 40% on price. We do that in some government tenders in India, but only in defense. We don't do it across the spectrum.
It's very interesting.
So there's no level playing field. I know the Bombay Club talked about level playing field, but it was a different level playing field. Here I'm talking about allow Indian industry as it's crawling to stand and reward it for giving you the world's best product. I'm not saying buy Indian because it'll be crappy and worse than the Chinese product. I'm saying reward India for making the best product because we're capable of doing that. If you look at the Tata Nexon, if you look at Forest Essentials, these are products that anybody can be proud of anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can say it's Indian and they go, I accept it. It's beautiful. It's Indian. Allow that to happen across industry, but particularly in the EV industry. And that's from policy and it's from attitude, right? And I think that needs to change. That's a mindset that needs to change. Yeah. But it's, in my opinion, easier said than done. It's just not within our framework.
But I'm fascinated with your response to this, really, because, and it's great that you're actually, so forthcoming about saying this. Because again, most of what we hear from the industry is always trying to straddle these 2 points of view, that you need to incentivize your own industry, but you also don't want to be protectionist. You don't want to close yourself off from the rest of the world. We're, competent enough. Our industry is competent enough, to stand its own ground, and we don't need this kind of, yes. So you are, I think what you're suggesting, sounds like, a very, sensible, practical thing to do, because how else do you ensure that there is, quality in the, in an Indian made product, and there's enough incentive to produce that quality, because hands down, you're going to you're going to be beaten by, another country, which, definitely operates at a much, larger scale. So how do you do that? I see what you're saying as a very, very viable solution, but would your industry peers agree with that?
It's a good question. I think a lot of the industry imports from China, and that's the reason there is no overt policy, because you can't buy it from India, right? So a lot of stuff is imported from China, and screwdriver technology, assembled and sold as an Indian product. And the point I'm making is from the bottom of my heart, a passion that says, how do we make it Indian? What Modi had said, Atmanirbhar, how do we truly become that? And that comes from policy and attitude. The truth is, if you remove protection from any industry today, it would be gobbled up by the Chinese, save a few where the Chinese are not participating. I challenge you, name any industry from textiles through to making Ganesh idols, through to electric vehicle chargers, cars. If you remove the sort of protectionism to allow them to come and dump, Indian industry would struggle. And you see it across, right? Remember the controversy about Ganesh idols being imported from China and not being made in India.
Absolutely.
You see it in little bursts and spurts everywhere till that loophole is closed. And it stops, and that's our reality. So there's.
But how long do we go on providing this protection for? And again, I'm just being devil's advocate here because it'll be interesting to get your point of view on this.
Well, if you're an Indian company trying to sell in China, see what happens. We had a factory in China, and everything was stacked against us. Everything. There was no way we could compete in the local market because we were not Chinese. 5 years, we lost a lot of money, packed our bags and left.
Very critical perspective shift. I believe it starts to make a lot more sense when you look at it that way.
So I'm not saying protection. I'm saying give extra points for the world's best products and then promote India to make the world's best products. Very different from protect an Indian product.
Fair enough.
That's not the comment at all. If that Chinese company is invested in India to make a world-class product in India, give it the extra points. No problem. As part of a government tender. But let it be giving Indian jobs, using Indian research and development technology, keeping intellectual property in India, doing the sorts of stuff the Chinese expect you to do in China.
Right. That's the only way to actually, do this sustainably. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, nice, passionate conversation here. You brought it out. I'm interested. You talk across the spectrum, government, industry. In your experience or your high-level 40,000 feet view, which is the most electrified state in India when it comes to vehicles?
Oh, Again, I think whatever I'll say from this point on will just be perception based, because one would imagine that a Bangalore, is where it's at in terms of, just the concentration of early adopters that you find in that city. But at the same time, the Delhi government has put out a stellar EV policy, which we saw last year. So, if you were to look at which state is providing the most subsidy, then I believe, Delhi, Gujarat to some extent, would be close contenders, and some other states also. I mean, I think many states have government EV policies now. So it's hard to, just, have the numbers off the top of your head. But in terms of the ecosystem, how easy will it be for you to find a charging point? How likely are you to have, a designated parking spot? Will your apartment complex, provide you a parking space with, where you can plug in a charger? I think all of these are questions that would go into answering this question again. So I remember speaking to, Tarun from Aether Energy, who pointed out that, this is something that they are actively trying to work towards. How do we get, RWAs or, like residential complexes to install this, just plug points. It doesn't take a lot of investment. It doesn't need you to redesign your entire blueprint. You just have to factor this in somehow, and that goes a long way. If you don't have swappable batteries, if you don't have an elevator again, at your place, how are you going to charge this vehicle? And, you must have seen these images, from China, that there is this, long charge, that's coming up from a window. It's just emerging from somewhere, because how do you, charge the damn thing, So those are, I think factors that one must look at. So I don't have an answer really, but I would think that also considering that there's so many manufacturers situated in Bangalore and also the tier 2 cities, by the way, and Indore, for instance, or even a Pune, like the Chetak opened up booking for these cities before they did in Delhi. So they might have found perhaps more buyers there. That's what I would have thought until, I was faced with this reality that there are places like Indore, which finds itself a lot more, conducive to adopting EVs. So, yeah, I think if you look at all of these factors, we might have an answer, but I won't be able to, call any one state a winner right now.
So we ask this question to everybody. So we have an unfair leverage on having learned from many people's opinions. But,
and what's the answer?
So the answer is horses for courses. And the reason for that is we're so early in the stage. It depends. You have to nuance that question and say, do you mean the most amount of buses, or do you mean the most amount of rickshaws,
and that
most amount of scooters? Because, for example, if you would say which is the most electrified state in India today, by sheer numbers, it would be Uttar Pradesh, which would shock everybody. But that's because they have the most amount of rickshaws.
Right.
Most amount of electric rickshaws. Right, they go to Delhi, and then they all in the largest cities.
That's why, even a Kolkata or a Delhi, with these
now, do you add
lead-acid
trams,
run.
and do you add the lead-acid run rickshaws? Will you add trams? Will you add metro? There's many ways to cut this pie up.
Right.
So the overall view is, if you were just to look at numbers without a nuance, it would likely be Delhi, UP. But once you start to nuance them, then, the largest number of electric buses are likely in Ahmedabad at the moment, but that changes all the time. So I want to ask you, from your perspective, because hype is something that media addresses quite well. I'm not saying the media makes hype, I'm saying addresses hype quite well. One of the concerns that we have watching this industry is hype. We're almost in a bubble today, because not only the amount of investment that's going there, but also how that investment is quite often managed, because it's managed with media headlines. And quite often you're worried about whether these targets and statements that are being made are achievable. And therefore, will there be an investor burnout that will not facilitate the real growth in the industry when it comes? And will there be a buyer burnout, which will again not facilitate the real growth when it comes? And you've seen that in so many times in India over so many different sectors, where the early hype creates a bursted bubble, and then we are once bitten, twice shy, and the industry takes 3 times as long to grow. We are seeing that hype in all the media headlines today. What is your own assessment of whether this will have a negative impact long term for the industry, or whether this is just par for the course nowadays and we've got to roll with the punches?
You put your journalist friend in a tough spot, I have to say. But while sure hype is par for the course also in some ways, let's also be alive to the fact that it's also the media which is scrutinizing this hype quite a bit. So I think we're performing both of those functions, and the hype is, I mean, companies have a lot of marketing muscle, by their own selves. And the function of the media, therefore, is to just examine, that what we're reporting on is accurate. And what the companies might claim is accurate. You simply don't want to be, taking the company's word for it and put it out. So of course, for a number of factors, there is, hype these days, and we're a very young country. We have so many people who are, commuting daily to their, places of work or university. Everyone wants to arrive, looking like, like a canary yellow scooter, which is electric. So those are things that are very real in terms of, making an influence. And marketers who know this well have been able to capitalize on it. Now, I won't be able to say if it's wrong to do it, because they're here to, run a business, and it's well within their rights to do all of that. But is it detrimental? I would say only to the extent that they make a promise and then are not able to deliver, because the market is very nascent. So, and the reputational risks are also very high. So you want to be sure that the product you're putting out lives up to the hype. So there's nothing wrong with the hype, because in the end, it's contributing to greater adoption, which is what we want. So I'm not saying the ends are going to justify the means, but we just want that, whatever is being promised to the consumer in terms of a superior product, in terms of a superior experience. And we're at the stage where we're just building this out for everyone to experience. So we're going to be the first ones to see it before, it becomes mainstream in the next 10 years. So it's important to do this right now. Of course, there's going to be teething troubles. Everyone's gone through it. Every market has gone through it. But the way to handle it is that, you should be transparent about the challenges that you face. You should perhaps not commit to timelines, which then lead you or force you to, make a compromised product. So those are, and I'm sure that manufacturers are keeping this in mind, because for themselves too, and for the investors who are providing them with the cash to actually, do this development and manufacturing, they are accountable to all of these stakeholders as well. So if they want to sort of, be in the market, the only way to do it is to get the product right. But if there is hype, the media will certainly report it. That's what it has to do. But like I said, it also scrutinizes what goes on behind that hype. And I think that's the best you can do. And then, the market itself will tell you what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right.
So to get to wrapping up the conversation, Alicia, I want to ask you a question we ask all of our talent that comes on the show. And it's a frivolous question that we ask. But the reason we ask it is because it brings a lot of clarity in the answer.
No question's a frivolous question.
It does. It often brings a lot of clarity in the answer. So I'm interested in your viewpoint on this. And so here's the question. If you had the opportunity to be Prime Minister of India for one day, and in that one day you could make any decision you wanted to help the electric vehicle industry in India, what would that decision be?
I would have to think long and hard before I answer that. Yeah. So stepping into those shoes, my God, I think, you should give me some cues, because I think the first thing I would do is call up people like you and ask, what do we need to do? Because, nobody can claim to have all the answers. It's, again, such a nascent industry still in India. Even in the developed markets, there's so much that they are figuring out, So for us, of course, fortunately, we've taken on this crazy pace at which things are happening. Manufacturers are bringing in products, if not making them here. So, while everyone sees the opportunity, I would want to perhaps just think about how do I make it, mass market. And then, like in one of the, earlier points that we were discussing, you said it goes back to changing the mindset, it goes right back to the classrooms. I'm going to have to contend with questions of, how am I going to put, charging, point where, There are villages which still haven't been electrified. If I really am hoping, that every person in the country is driving an electric car, is it a realistic scenario that I can put up that sort of infrastructure? So I'm just going to have to do a lot of, evaluation in terms of what is a realistic target for me, where people are still using, bikes to get around, walking. I mean, India is just, most of India is not the cities that we see or the cities that I see. So even my perspective is so limited, to just what I am seeing around me. But, you leave the top 4 or 5 cities and you'll see a completely different world emerge. So I think as a prime minister and, the panopticon view that I would have, I'd be looking at those things a lot more than, solving stuff in the cities, which people are taking care of anyway.
It's a very good answer, actually. It's a very, very
I'm
good
not
answer.
sure if that answers your question, but I suddenly could feel the weight of that question on my shoulders.
So everybody answers that question from the perspective of the industry. And so, that's the problem with being the prime minister, because you meet 5 people and they all have 5 different things that are needed for the industry. And how do you achieve all of those? Because quite often they are not concurrent. They are antithesis for each other. No, it's a good answer. To go to the places where they don't have electricity and start right at the very basic of let's get electricity before we can get electric vehicles. So I really like that answer. Alicia, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'd have to say it's one of the best conversations that we've had on the show.
You're too kind and you're very generous, but it was, I learned as much really from you.
Thank you very much for making the time to be with us.
My pleasure, Ravin. Thank you so much for having me.